What is happening, everyone? It's the Football Therapist here. Time to give you our championship weekend fantasy starts and sits. A little bit of transparency as always on our last week's performances. We designated 32 quarterbacks for starts or sits, got 24 correct for 75%. Designated 59 running backs as starts or sits, got 37 correct for 67%. Designated 84 wide receivers as starts or sits, got 55 correct for 65%. And we designated 40 tight ends as starts or sits. We got 25 correct for 63%. Overall, a really solid week. We always like to aim for that 70% percentile. We got into the 60s, high 60s, 70s for our quarterbacks. Some of our bigger hits were Ryan Tannehill, Kirk Cousins, Jalen Hurts, J.D. McKissick, J.K. Dobbins, Tony Pollard, Cole Beasley, Marvin Jones, Brandon Ayuk, Hollywood Brown, Robert Tonyan, and then Logan Thomas. Some of our bigger misses were Phillip Rivers, Derek Carr. We had Matt Ryan as a sit, Mike Davis, Leonard Fournette as a sit, Ty Johnson as a sit, Tyler Lockett, DJ Chark, Michael Pittman Jr., Jonah we has as a sit. He finally showed up. And then Rob Gronkowski didn't do much. So those are some of our bigger misses for the week. Here are some quarterbacks we think you should start this week that could have a quality week. Tua versus the Raiders, Mitch Trubisky versus Jacksonville, Drew Lock versus the Chargers, Jalen Hurts versus Dallas, going to have another big week, Ryan Tannehill versus the Packers. These are all kind of streamers, kind of must starts every week. And then Jared Goff versus Seattle. So on the road, he's passed 20 fantasy points 5 times. They're coming off an embarrassing loss. Seattle, they give up 21.8 points per game to quarterbacks. I think it could be a higher scoring contest than last time these two met. He is risky, but he is a big ceiling play in my opinion. So I think that if you don't have many options, I would start Jared Goff this week going against Seattle. Here are some quarterbacks that I would sit this week. Kirk Cousins versus the Saints. Derek Carr versus the Dolphins. He's questionable, but I think he'll play. Matt Ryan versus Kansas City. Phillip Rivers versus Pittsburgh. Cam Newton versus Buffalo. All these guys just have been inconsistent or have tough matchups. And then Big Ben is a big one for a sit this week. The offense, they've been struggling. He's only reached 15 fantasy points once in the past 5 games. So he's really been off his game over the past few weeks. He's going against Indy. They only give up about 17 points per game to quarterbacks. So he's a very risky start that I wouldn't want to start in a championship game. Here are some running backs to start this week. Jeff Wilson Jr. versus Arizona. No Raheem Mostert this week. Chase Edmonds versus San Francisco. I think he could be used a bit more in the passing game. Salvin Ahmad is a big start for me if Myles Gaskin is out. He had a huge week against the Patriots last week, and I think he can continue that streak against the Raiders. So start him if Myles Gaskin is out. Le'Veon Bell versus Atlanta. No Clyde Edwards-Helaire, so he'll get most of the work. J.K. Dobbins versus the Giants has been on a roll lately. Then J.D. McKissick, big play this week. He saw 10 targets last week, had 9 catches, 1 touchdown. Carolina, they give up 20 points per game to running backs. If Gibson is out, it's going to be a monster play. But if Gibson is in, I still think he could be a quality flex this week. Here are some running backs to sit this week. Ito Smith was a hot name. They said that he'd be starting this week. I would not start him in fantasy, though. Too risky. Adrian Peterson versus the Bucks. Bucks have a great rush defense. Nyheim Hines kind of lost a lot of touches to Jonathan Taylor over the past few weeks. Going against the Steelers, I wouldn't start him. Zach Moss versus New England and Sony Michel versus Buffalo. Both running backs I think will struggle this game. And then Kenyon Drake is a sit for me. He saw only 12 touches last week. He hasn't hit over 100 yards rushing since week 10. He's very touchdown dependent in my opinion. San Francisco, they give up only 15.8 points per game to running backs, and they're strong against the rushing game. So in order for him to succeed, he'll need a touchdown. I don't think he gets that this week, so I would sit him this week. Here are some receivers to start this week. Nelson Aguilar versus the Dolphins. Russell Gage versus Kansas City. He's been on a hot streak, had 15 points in the last 3 games. Rashad Higgins versus the Jets. Darnell Mooney versus Jacksonville, seeing a lot more targets. Allen Lazard versus Tennessee. Could be a very high-scoring passing game. The Marvin Jones, to me, is very interesting. 3 games of 20 or more points in the last 6 games. Wide receiver 11 for the last 4 weeks. He's seen 12 targets in 3 out of the last 4 games. If Stafford plays, he's a big play for me this week, as Tampa Bay is giving up 25 points per game to wide receivers and kind of got shredded last week. So I would start Marvin Jones, especially if Matthew Stafford plays. Here are some wide receivers to sit this week. Emmanuel Sanders versus Minnesota. This isn't getting the volume that I would like, so he's really big play dependent. Lynn Bowden Jr. is a sit for me if Devontae Parker and Mike Gesicki plays. If they both play, he'll lose some of that volume. Denzel Mims versus Cleveland, not enough volume there. Sterling Shepard versus Baltimore, tough matchup. Jacoby Myers versus Buffalo, tough matchup. Then Chase Claypool, he's just falling off a cliff. In the last 4 weeks, he's wide receiver 65. He's getting the targets, but he's been inefficient on offense. So I would not trust him this week going against the Indianapolis defense. Here are some tight ends to start this week. First off, for tight ends, just start your studs. If you got to the championship, hopefully you have one. Some of these guys are kind of fringe players. Jared Cook, Mike Gesicki, Hayden Hurst, Austin Hooper, all have decent matchups or could see more volume this week. Then Logan Thomas, he saw 15 targets last week. He's been the tight end 3 over the past 4 weeks. It's a solid matchup. I'd give him a start this week going against Carolina. Here are some tight ends to sit. Irv Smith Jr., Dalton Schultz, Jack Doyle, Jimmy Graham, all have lost volume recently. And Irv Smith Jr., actually, if Kyle Rudolph is out, I would think about playing him. He had a drop touchdown last week, but if he's in, I would not start him. And then Zach Ertz, he's been playing around 70 to 75% of the snaps, but he's only had 2 catches in each of the past 3 games. I just cannot trust him this week, so sit him for your championship matchups. Here are some of the top defenses to play this week. Arizona versus San Francisco. I don't really know what San Francisco's quarterback situation is like, so that could be a tough game. Chicago versus Jacksonville, Houston versus Cincinnati, and Philly versus Dallas. If you guys have any more questions, feel free to DM me on Instagram. It's been a fun time making these videos for the 2020 football season. If you have any matchups next week, I won't be making any videos, but you could DM me on Instagram or comment below. Good luck in your championship matchups, and we'll be back soon with some 2021 fantasy football content.